Have you ever wanted to know what it takes to become a wedding photographer? Stick around and find out what all it takes to become a wedding photographer. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, be sure to go follow Photos by Rach on Instagram. Your wedding day is the most memorable day probably that you will ever have. You will have tons of moments that are precious and timeless, and it is so important to have a great wedding photographer to capture those special moments. As a wedding photographer, I have the privilege of capturing the most moments with every kiss, every laugh, every tear, all by my lens, but there's a lot more in my job than just showing up and taking the photos. I want to take you through a day of my life as a wedding photographer, showing you what all goes into creating those magical moments and memories that last a life. Now let's break down the experience of a wedding photographer into many different areas. You have to prepare for the big day, capturing the wedding, and then also editing the photos afterwards. Don't forget about timelines, lighting. This also plays a huge factor into wedding photos. Don't forget to check the weather. That's also a main part in a big wedding day. And understanding the perfect time of day to shoot. So when your lighting is going to be the most softest in the morning versus the evening, it might be a little bit more harsh. And then you also have sunset times. And sunset times vary anywhere from 3 to 7 o'clock. And then in the summertime, it can also go from 7 p.m. sometimes all the way up until 9:30. So you really have to pay attention when you're drawing out timelines for your clients, and kind of pay attention to what times are gonna have the best light. And then in those times, you also have to pay attention to when you're going to have the softest light, because when sunset times, when the sun's starting to set, you have approximately about an hour and a half or so of good light time. Other than that, it'd be too harsh or too dark out. One huge factor into weddings and why you should hire a professional is because you do have to prepare for the wedding day. And what I mean by that isn't just showing up with camera gear and SD cards. It's more so preparing for the entire day. So outlining your day from start to finish. There's going to be different sets of photos you have to take. There's gonna be different timelines you have to do. You're gonna have to work with many vendors. You're probably gonna have to work with, maybe family members if they're getting involved with any of the planning. So that's something you really have to take into consideration when doing weddings. It's not as simple as just showing up and shooting the day and getting all the fun photos. There's a lot of planning that goes into weddings. There's also a lot of time that goes into that. So typically, if you're booking out a bride a year to a year and a half in advance, which is pretty normal, you have to think about, communicating with that bride and answering any kind of questions she has up until the big day. So a lot of planning goes into weddings. Speaking of booking clients and speaking of brides, another factor you have to take into consideration when you're a wedding photographer is booking clients. So what that means is who your ideal client is going to be, or what type of setting you want to shoot for weddings. There's elopements, there's small weddings, which are called micro weddings. You can have huge events, so weddings that are anywhere from 200 people to 600 people. You might have to take into consideration there if you're gonna need an extra hand. If you're getting a huge bridal party, you might want to take into consideration how many people you're gonna have to pose, how many people are gonna have to be listening to you in large groups. These are all things that you're gonna have to prepare for. So getting as much information from clients and brides is very detrimental before the big day. So before you even book the day, you're gonna wanna ask those questions. So that comes into the initial consultation and understanding couple style. Another big thing is you're going to want to ask people what style they like prior to booking with you. You know, you don't want somebody booking with you that likes very light and airy photos. If you have more of like a darker contrasty look on your photos, you know, essentially probably just won't be the style that they're looking for. That's something you're really going to want to take the time to explain to your clients prior to them booking your day. Another thing is discussing package options. Again, timelines and just expectations. So sometimes people want, you know, an elopement, and that's totally fine. So you kind of have to break down what all that entails. So, you know, you may not get an elopement package that comes with sunset bridals, because elopements are typically less people, or you know, you might want the sunset bridals but you don't want the wedding party photos, because typically when you elope, people don't have very big bridal parties, or if they do, it's usually, you know, 2 to 3 people, and then they have some family like watching over the ceremony. But that's something to take into consideration too. A lot of time and planning all goes into weddings. Another thing you're going to want to think about is your equipment setup. I know most people think maybe going to a wedding, you may just want to take, you know, your camera and a couple SD cards, maybe an extra lens. But I would go as far as saying, you know, 2 to 3 cameras is normal for a wedding. You know, you want to bring multiple lenses. You definitely don't want to just have maybe 2 or 3 lenses, because there's all kinds of different situations, angles you can run into on the big day. Details is one where, you know, you're going to want something that's going to be able to focus on more up close details versus, you know, maybe if you're documenting the ceremony, you're going to probably want a larger lens. That way you can get far back and make sure to capture that. So yeah, a lot of different things go into weddings. So another thing that goes into weddings is coordinating with couples. So we talked a little bit about going over the wedding day and the details and what all that entails, but another thing you have to take into consideration is people want specific shots. Typically the brides, you know, they're going to be the ones wanting specific shots. They're going to maybe want, you know, some photos with their family members, maybe something they had in mind, maybe something they saw on Pinterest. There's going to be all kinds of different ideas that you're going to have brides ask you about, and those are something you're going to have to take into consideration. So bringing shot lists, bringing those family lists, talking with the couples, just making sure they like your style. Again, there's all kinds of different styles of photography, but making sure you discuss with the client and seeing what their shot list looks like, and making sure you can even accomplish that, because that is a big deal on the day of the wedding. Another huge thing for wedding days is working with other vendors. And you may think that you show up and, you know, you maybe communicate once or twice with vendors throughout the day, but typically that's not the case. Wedding planners really come into a lot of different areas to help with this, but typically if there's not a wedding planner, they do rely on the photographers, just because we do have to come pre-prepared. You know, we've been talking with the bride for a while. We come with our shot list, we come with our timelines. They typically expect us to kind of understand and know what's going on, where they need to be, where we need to be, when cocktail hour is. These are all things we, you know, pre-discuss with brides. So typically they do come to us asking for, whether it be copies of timelines, or, you know, maybe they want to go through what the average day is going to look like after the ceremony. These are things they want to know, just because, you know, when the bride's coming out and they've got their ceremony and they're done, maybe that they're going to go in and do a little announcement. So these are things that vendors do not necessarily rely on the wedding photographer for, but if there isn't a planner, typically they will ask. So one other vendor that's very important for the wedding day is the videographer. So that is another thing you really have to take into consideration on the day of the wedding, is where you're going to be working, who you're going to be working with, what their timeline looks like versus yours, and kind of going over things together and just trying your best to work tightly together, because you will be standing next to each other throughout the entire day and probably night too. So what this kind of looks like for me is going through and maybe discussing how we'll get some shots, or if we want to hang up the dress a certain way and maybe they want some certain shots of theirs and maybe I want some shots on mine. Going through and just making sure we both have what we need. It does take a little bit of extra time, but again, these are big deals, and on the day of the wedding, you really want to make sure you get everything you're wanting and more. Now that we've looked into how we prepare for a wedding, let's dive into what it looks like when I capture those perfect moments during the big day. Typically, when you're capturing a ceremony, you're gonna want a variety of wide shots and you're gonna want some close-up shots. And what I mean by that is you're gonna want a photo, you know, of everybody. You're gonna want the guests to be involved in this picture. You're gonna want the bride and the groom, all the wedding party. You're gonna wanna see if you can get some of the family members. It's important to kind of capture the emotion throughout the big day. So capturing those details of maybe family members as the bride's walking down the aisle and maybe the groom's reaction, those are things you're really gonna wanna pay attention to. And so something you might ask is, well, how do you do all of that? You know, you're one person. How are you going to be at the front of the room while you're at the end? This is another way you're gonna have to think about things like hiring a second shooter or making sure your videographer is right next to you. You're gonna wanna make sure you communicate those things with whoever you're working directly with, whether it be a second shooter or a videographer. And if you don't have either of those, then you're gonna have to time when the bride is walking out and grabbing the groom's reaction and then making sure you grab the bride's reaction coming down the aisle, and as long as you can go ahead and capture the family members as well. So it's a very quick. One big factor during the wedding day and just the wedding in general is making sure you stay on time. So again, pre-planning those timelines and making sure that you're staying on time and just running through and making sure you're not behind on anything is going to be a crucial part of the wedding day. So that means things like group photos, family and friends gathering for formal shots. Those are all going to be part of your responsibility, essentially, if there isn't a wedding coordinator, to make sure that things are running on time and people are where they need to be.